Hi, hi.
Hi.
Welcome back.
Hi.
You flew back to China?
Oh yeah, I just arrived in Chicago yesterday. So yeah, still a little bit
Jet
dizzy from the jet lag.
I get that. Thank you for joining us, even after the jet lag, even when you were still in jet lag.
No, I feel like this is very important thing. I mean, the thing that you talked about. So yeah, I feel very honored to be invited by Gina to join this panel.
Thank you so much. Hi, Professor. How are you doing? Oh, they need to unmute you. Give me a
Yes.
sec.
Can you hear
Yes.
me now? Okay. Yeah, wait. Yes. How
Hi,
are you all?
Gina.
Hi. I'm so sorry you have to join with jet lag. How are you feeling?
I'm trying to like just to wake up. But I think I can still function.
Yeah,
How
she's
are,
suffering from jet lag.
right. How are your cats? Did they survive the trip? How are your cats?
Oh yeah, they are doing great. But one of them, after it arrived at my home, it stopped eating. Like, I mean,
Oh no.
like maybe it's just because it needs some time to get familiar with this new environment, but the other one is doing very great. Like just
Oh, good.
Doesn't influence me at all.
yeah. The one who feel a little bit nervous, it didn't eat for
Oh,
like one day, like after since we arrived here tomorrow. Like, but I think it's doing okay. Just need more time.
yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. It's a huge adjustment. Well, I'm glad you got home safely or, to your Chicago home.
Thank you for joining us, Professor Fedock. I know that you're
Oh, thanks.
busy,
Oh,
busy,
no.
busy researcher and professor.
No, I appreciate the invitation and the care about this topic. I just wanted to make sure, I appreciate you allowing me to also invite two other people who
Yeah,
are
for
very
sure.
passionate and well informed too. Hiya,
Hello,
Jen.
how are you doing?
I don't know if she can unmute.
We have, I'm gonna let my coworker know that we have Yijing. Tell me that if I'm wrong with the pronunciation of your name.
I don't think she can
Tian Tian,
unmute.
could you please unmute Yijing also? Or is it Hanbo? Could you please unmute Yijing? Because they unmute everyone just in case, like more people are getting in and people forget to
Mhm.
mute. It's gonna be a mess. So,
Yes, it worked. Thank you.
morning.
Morning.
Did I pronounce it right? Yijing?
Yes, Yajin.
Yejing? All right. Cool, cool.
Thank you.
All right, we have 2 more minutes and we're probably gonna wait for a few more minutes just to let people get in. How's everyone? Oh, the weather is getting better and better in Chicago.
It's sort of surreal, how little of a winter we had, really.
Oh yeah. I mean, I spent 4 years in Miami, so like the Chicago
Oh.
weather is like killing me. There was like a whole week under zero. I'm like, I cannot survive this. I cannot survive this. I want to go back to Miami so bad.
It used to be like January and February, you just didn't really see the sun. Like it would be this like gray, cold period of, several months. So
Well,
this
I guess global warming is a real thing then.
it is. For sure.
Yeah. All right, we have more and more people coming in. Welcome. We're gonna wait for a few more minutes. We're gonna start around 11:03 or so. All right, I think we'll get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this very bright Friday morning. And we invited Professor Gina Fedock, who focused on intimate partner violence and sexual violence research, and her two doctoral students to share their opinion and analysis based on recent news of a Google engineer who punched his wife to death with bare hands. So we're gonna have a panel discussion about it. And after we introduce ourselves, we're gonna have a thorough discussion on this news and, the power dynamics behind it. And after the panel discussion session, we're gonna have our Q&A session so that we can give our audiences a chance to bring up their concerns and questions on this topic. So I will start with my own self-introduction. So my name is Daria. I am currently first-year student from Crum's Family School of Social Work in University of Chicago. And I got my bachelor degree in University of Miami with double majors in gender studies and psychology. I'm currently the director of A Voice Chicago office, and it's a brand new office, and we are actively recruiting. So if you're interested, let me know. And I'm also social admin track. I'm having an internship in Share Network, which is an aging center. We help aging people to age well. And I'm also on associate board of Chicago Asian Women Empowerment. All right, and Gina Fedock. Professor Fedock, do you mind giving us a brief introduction? I know I give several bullet points here to give our audiences a sense that what you do. And yeah, let's welcome Professor Fedock. Oh, you're on mute. Oh, interesting.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for inviting us, Doria, and for organizing this. and putting attention to this really important topic and this pressing area of action. So I appreciate the care for everyone who's showing up to discuss this, and I look forward to our discussion. As mentioned, my name is Gina Fedock. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm an associate professor here at the Crown Family School of Social Work, Policy, and Practice at the University of Chicago. I focus specifically on improving the mental health and well-being of women who experience marginalization in a variety of ways, particularly women involved in the criminal legal system. So thank you again for having us.
Thank you, Professor Fedock. Thank you for joining us. And then let's welcome Yejin Song. Could you please give us a brief self-introduction?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. Hi, my name is Yejin. I use her pronouns. I'm a first-year doctoral student in U Chicago. I have been working in clinical settings with survivors of intimate partner violence and sexual violence back home in Korea, but also in here in the United States. And I am honored to have this space with you guys and talk about this issue. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And Li Ying Huang.
Hi, everyone. Also, thank you for having me on this important note. So, I am also a doctoral student at Crown, and I have worked with survivors of intimate partner violence, both in United States and also back in China. And so my research is trying to understand the states and the professional intervention in gender-based violence through critical and feminist lens. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Welcome, everyone. And for those who may not familiar with this incident, with this news, I would love to give you all a basic introduction of what happened in the past few weeks on this news. So, I'm sorry. So 27-year-old Google engineer from China has been charged with murder after beating his wife to death. All right. I'm sorry. I will just restart. So a 27-year-old Google engineer from China has been charged with murder after beating his wife to death in the United States in a case that has shocked mainland social media. And the suspect, Chen Liren, is, going to have repeatedly punched his wife, Yu Xuanyi, in the head at their home in Santa Clara, a city in the center of Silicon Valley, where Google headquarters are located. And on January 16, the police found Yu dead on the floor in the bedroom of the home with severe blunt force injuries to her head. And Chen was found standing near her, staring blankly, with an extremely swollen and purple right hand, scratches on his arms, and covered in blood splatters. And the police found them after responding to a welfare check request made by Chen's friend, who said Chen was refusing to answer his phone or door. And Chen has been charged with the murder of Yu, but by the time of writing, had not been arranged due to his hospitalization. And this is I copied this introduction of the news from this South News from China. And, they're Asian couples. They're well-educated. And speaking of the identities of the victim, we can see there are a lot of intersectionalities of is showing here. And, how do intersecting system of oppression like racism, sexism, and xenophobia intersect to enable domestic violence and gender-based violence against Asian women? I really want to hear more on this question from you all, from our three panelists.
First of all, those details are quite intense. And I wonder if, before we start to discuss, I would like for us to maybe start with some foundational terms. As throughout this panel, if we use the term IPV, I just want to say that that may be referring to intimate partner violence. That's commonly an acronym. As we talk about dynamics of intimate partner violence, particularly looking at structural violence and other forms of violence, we often use terms like victim or survivor, and we can often use those terms interchangeably. And these terms refer to a partner in an abusive relationship who is being harmed. So if we can kind of start with like describing intimate partner violence and then kind of move broader, is that okay if we start with just some basics?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, whenever we talk about intimate partner violence, we're talking about intimate relationships. And these can be dating relationships, it can be marriages, it can be partnerships. And it's usually in which one partner seeks to have power and control over another partner. And this partner seeks power and control over another partner by engaging in forms of abuse. We can think about forms of physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, economic abuse. Abuse also doesn't look just one way. And in general, when we're talking about intimate partner violence, we want to pay attention to patterns of tactics over time and the cumulative effects of these varied tactics. So emotional abuse is actually one of the most common forms of abuse, and it's harder to detect. And we want to pay attention to like, what are the effects of this? How is this establishing an uneven power dynamic within relationships? IPV often operates so that the survivor becomes more isolated, often has to depend more or rely more on their other partner. And this can contribute to multiple forms of harm. When we're talking about violence against women, and we never want to talk about just gender, so we're just starting the conversation, but whenever we talk about violence against women, it's a global issue that's all too common. Globally, approximately 1 in 3 women have experienced physical or sexual intimate partner violence at least once in their lifetimes. And it's important to note that this is a global statistic that doesn't even include emotional abuse. So whenever we think 1 in 3, I mean, it's much higher if we were to include other forms of abuse outside of physical and sexual violence. And when we talk about emotional abuse, these can be things like putting someone down, lowering their self-esteem, accusing a survivor of cheating, isolating them from friends and family. It can be gaslighting them, making them question their ability to even be able to tell reality. So when we say 1 in 3 women globally, again, it's much more prevalent than that. A recent study that was conducted in 2020 looked specifically at Chinese immigrant women in the United States and found that 1 in 5 Chinese immigrant women were experiencing intimate partner violence just in the past year. And today we're talking about someone who was actually killed by their partner. And when we look also globally, just at the rates in 2022, just based on the number of women and girls who were killed by intimate partners or a family member in 2022, on average, more than 5 women and girls are killed every hour by their partner or someone in their family. So when we think about this hour that we're together across the globe, approximately 5 women and girls are estimated to be killed by someone that they know. And whenever we look at actually the murders of women and girls, it is a majority of them occur by an intimate partner versus about 12% of men.
Mhm.
So again, whenever we're talking about intimate partner violence, we're talking about what are tactics and patterns of power and control. And we always have to situate this within our structures and our systems. You know, we look at like what in our societies and our cultures and our norms and our media and the way that we talk, the language that we use, the types of relationships we have, our institutions, our governments, how are dynamics of power and control operating there? How, for example, we look in the United States, how do we see structurally how are relationships happening? What hierarchies of power occur? Because a lot of times when we talk about the types of violence that survivors of IPV experience, it's not just in their relationships. It's looking at how systems treat them. It's the way that they're invalidated. It's the way that they're also economically deprived within our society. We can just look at, you know, pay differentials by gender and race, and we can easily see really major structural forms of violence in terms of pay and basic necessities. So I just wanted to start with this sort of like overview of like what is intimate partner violence, and as we talk about it, making sure that we're returning to this idea that it happens because it's about power and control and trying to establish that form of dominance. And this is something that we see on a macro level, right? That is getting replicated within our relationships. And so forms of racism that occur in our society also influence what's happening within our households and what happens when a survivor goes to seek services. So I know I just talked a lot, but I'll pass it over to Ling and Yajen to also add. Sorry to talk so much.
I really appreciate this general information about what we're going to discuss later in this panel discussion, because not everyone in our panel discussion has the basic like background in gender studies or psychology. So thank you, Professor Fedock, for providing all those general information and all those data. But speaking of, because you were talking about the types of domestic violence, right? There's one type of domestic violence named emotional abuse. So there are actually some news and comments saying that the wife, the victim, actually has some emotional, abuse history to her husband. Do you think that's the same level of violence as what the husband did, or does that even rationalize his, this level of physical violence? Do you think it's comparative, or
Right. So again, we want to look at patterns. I didn't mention it with my bio, but I used to work with survivors of domestic and sexual violence as well. I think that's what Yajen Ling and I also share. And I remember at the domestic violence organization among staff, we talked about this one survivor. She had a relatively quote unquote good relationship with her partner. And once they got married, he actually beat her up really badly at the beginning of their marriage. And whenever she was in the hospital, he brought her this big bouquet of flowers. And after that incident, he continued to regularly bring her this big bouquet of flowers, even after her injuries healed. And he did it as a way of letting her remember what he did to her physically. It was a way of saying, like, remember that time that I did that and I could do it again. And she talked about the isolation that she felt, because imagine your friends and saying, he's giving me every week. I mean, that of, oh, he must really love you. And for her to try to explain, he brought this to me when I was in the hospital after he beat me up, like he's doing this to scare me. It's really hard for most survivors to explain those dynamics of, what this means, what's the history of the relationship, what happens in those sort of daily incidents as well. Emotional abuse is something that's much more subtle sometimes. And sometimes people say to me, like, how do you know if your partner is just being mean-spirited versus abusive? And again, we want to look at sort of power overall in terms of like, how is it distributed? What sort of threats are made? It is quite common to experience, whenever you're in an abusive relationship, feelings of isolation and rage and depression. All those things are really common. So when we start talking about, is emotional abuse the same as physical abuse? A lot of times in abusive relationships, we will see more of these like isolation, psychological abuse, economic abuse, and less often a lot of the physical and sexual abuse. Because a lot of partners find that if those forms of abuse are working, they don't actually have to use the physical forms. That abuse looks, like with that example that I just gave with a survivor, she experienced that physical abuse quite often. And that kind of set the tenor. It just had to be a threat. We hear about partners who punch a wall to show, like, I can do this to you. So it's also one of the things we've done in our society is said it's quote unquote not real abuse unless you have a bruise or a broken bone or a black eye, right? Like we tend to invalidate forms of non-physical abuse. It becomes questionable. We have a culture of blaming victims. So at the end of the day, whenever we talk about, sometimes when I see when someone is a victim, especially with an extreme case like this, there are questions of like, what did she do to deserve it? And that's one of the most common questions. What did she do to deserve this? And I want us to sort of deconstruct that. Why is our focus not on the person who did the act that was
Right.
so harmful, right?
Right.
Like, you know, what went into that? So again, I'm talking a lot. I want to invite Ling and Yejen because I know they both have a lot of passion about this, and I feel like I'm talking a lot.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, speaking of the, like people's focus and narratives focus, it's always interesting to notice that people always center our discussion around what causes leads the perpetrator did what he did, like from the angle of what this woman did. And rather than, focusing on this behavior itself is bad enough and why this guy is capable of doing, shitty things like this. And people always want to try to, problematize the female in this relationship. And I think, yeah, we talk about power relationship, power dynamics, and I'm pretty sure that Yijing and Li Ying have a lot of things to say about, the patriarchal cultural norms and power dynamics embedded in our culture, especially, in Asian communities. And, what do you think? What role does power dynamic and patriarchal cultural norms are playing a role here in normalizing violence against our Chinese or Asian women in general?
So I really appreciate Gina and Daria both like mentioning about how we want to focus on this case specifically. I think first, like I want to talk about how the press or the society in general tend to have a tendency to focus on what the abuser's mind, what's the intention, what's the motivation this person to do have. And more we discuss about this is giving the power to the abuser and having more people to try to sympathize what the abuser did, what enabled them to do this violence. So I think I just wanted to point out that as the general dynamic of the conversation a lot of time when people talk about IPV. So I just want to point out that. And second, like I think this connecting to your question about how the cultural norm, patriarchal norm is impacting this case is that, let's say if this couple had an issue of emotional violence ongoing before this incident happened, when in this extent, what made them to really difficult to find out help? What made them to really isolated within the relationship? So it leading to this incident that one person lose their life. I think it's directly connecting to the cultural norms and patriarchal norms of first, there's a lot of shame and also stigma around getting help or speaking about the relationship issue outside of their family in Asian culture. That's the one of thing we want to talk about. If they has this issue repeatedly throughout their relationship, what made them to not speaking about their issues? What made them to not really seeking out help? That's the one thing we can ask ourselves about what's the Asian culture in here made them really difficult to seek out help and make them really to have a difficult accessibility to all this resource that we have. And second, I think another point of this case is really highlighted and got a lot of attention is because they're wealthy, well-educated people in the United States. And I think I read a article almost described this as a dream of immigrant. They were well educated, right? Like financially established 2 million house, like all that really highlighted. And I think that's directly connecting to modern minority myth about the Asian population. They're really well educated, they're financially equipped. So the people assume that they will not have an issue, and they tend to be the internalized message as Asian population too. Even if they do have an issues in their relationship or their personal matter, that make them really difficult to find out help or open up to the community about what they're going through. I think that's also connecting to the cultural norm that being Asian in this country as a modern minority. And I think those are the things that impacting how this case shaped, but also how our focus shape about this incident specifically.
Right. I like that input. My personal answer to your question should probably gonna be, like before this news happened or before this incident happened, people tend to actionalize the domestic violence issue as something that because of their socioeconomic status, because of their educational level, because of, some personal issues they have to solve. But after this incident, people realize that even though this couple is well educated, they are financially capable, they are dream immigrant, but they still have those deepest shame or deepest ingrained power dynamics in their relationships, which causes this husband to do something like this. So I think this incident is quite insightful to provoke us to think more on domestic violence issues, not just about something on private sector, but also something as societal problem. Yeah. Li Ying, I want to hear more about your opinion on this.
Sure. I think Gina and Yejun already covered a lot of important points about IMV in general and also about this case. Maybe I just want to emphasize something that I really find disturbing or concerned about this case. So first, as Yejun said, why this incident made it to the news title is because the socioeconomic background of the couple. But because maybe because my experience of working with Chinese and Asian immigrants in the United States has experienced intimate partner violence, I can't help thinking about why those things are not discussed. I mean, the experience, they're undocumented, maybe they don't have such a privileged background, but they suffered similar pain and violence. I just feel like they shared more, I had to organize my language, but just the similarity between this couple and the couples I have worked with might be bigger than we thought, because what we faced is similar structural background in terms of their identity as an immigrant, in terms of their cultural beliefs they bring from their home country. So I just feel sad about how this can made into the title, news title, but the other or the majority of the suffer are not discussed or pay attention to. That's something that I feel very disturbed about. And the second thing is about what Jen has mentioned about the pattern of the relationship, because we know very little about the details of their relationship dynamic of this couple. So maybe this is just a very sad and tragic end of a long-term abuse, or something more complicated dynamic between the couple, but just we cannot really know what happened between them. But the tendency, as Yejun said, is just trying to figure out the specific interpersonal interaction between the couple that has led to this tragedy, without thinking about the more structural factors that led to their isolation. Their how they cannot express their frustration they experienced in the wide society, which they have to let it. I mean, when they cannot get help and express their feelings in their daily life with interaction with other people, they somehow have to let go in the forms of maybe violence to each other or things like that. I mean, I'm less interested in knowing about what really happened to this couple than knowing like the general experience of immigrants in the United States that led to their isolation and stuff being oppressed. Yeah.
Right. I totally agree that we need to keep our door open to offer help to our survivors, to victims, to perpetuators, to actually intervene this seemingly family issues. So we talk about the patriarchal, this cultural norms. But I'm wondering, is there could be a reason, could it be the stereotypes and the, cultural myth about Asian women? And, they're being submissive and they are also hypersexualized in all different social medias. And we are, socially constructed as being submissive, being in the weaker position in a relationship. Does that power dynamics, does that culture implications influence or make our Asian women as one of the most vulnerable community in domestic violence issues? Do you think that's one of the factors also?
I have thought about this issue beyond this one single case, but I think first of all, like yes, like the Asian woman being stereotypes identity as a sexual matter, a sexual being, that's definitely impacting on this gender-based violence in general. But when we're speaking specific about the domestic violence, I think it's more like perpetrated in the interracial relationship a lot, whether that's a domestic partner, whether that's a dating relationship. That tend to be a lot of Asian women in the state experience, whether that's on the street, whether that's a dating app, whether that's a real actual dating relationship. There's a lot of comment of being Asian as a submissive or sexually provocative. All those things have I think accumulated as their internalized identity. I think that can impact in the long-term relationship or dating relationship, even though the partner themselves is the same Asian guy as in this case. I think that's the one notion that can impact this one woman's internalized idea, but how they present themselves, how they identify themselves. So I think that's some things that we can see as not just this partner's two individual relationship, but that's accumulated experience this woman has to go through while living in the States as an Asian woman. Another point is that I think I wanted to focus on also beyond this just women's, but also how Asian men is portrayed in the States. They're portrayed as a less masculine, like less assertive, and all those things that men try to really strive to have this power, fight against this power because of the patriarchal norm they have. They believe in based on this traditional idea that like the man has to be the head of family, while the society see them as a less of men. Then how that it also harmful for this woman who live with this man and has to have a family with them. So I think it's both directional how this couple maybe internalize the societal idea, how the society drew the idea or image of the Asian men or women. I think that can be both making impact on internalized message they have. And I think it's also connecting to a very unfortunate case happened in 2021 in Atlanta, where the 6 women, Asian women killed by a man with the message of they wanted to delete or eliminate their temptation of Asian women's bodies. And then how the news first portrayed that as just another violence, but not the hate crime. So I think that's another thing is that being Asian in here with the idea of a submissive and hypersexualized, that tend to be lost between this violence that where it's heading to. When it's actually against the Asian women, they tend to lose this message between this. I think those are the things, the one of issue that we wanted to think about, how we want to portray this incidents.
That's kind of interesting because your answer just, call back to our first questions about how intersectionality is playing a role in this issue, and people tend to focus more than the other one. And
Exactly.
it is a racial issue, not just a sexism thing or, about gender. It's not just that.
Mm-hmm.
And Professor Fedock, I have a question. Do you find any similarities between different racial groups on sexual violence, on domestic violence? Is there any common things they share among racial groups?
Yeah, so I just want to reiterate the last point you just made of, we often hear the phrase gender-based violence. And I think in so many ways that starts to think we only think about gender, but all of this is racialized. So Jen bringing up that 6 Asian American women were killed in 2021. I mean, we know in the 1800s in the US, the passage of the Page Act, right, which excluded Chinese women from being able to immigrate, excuse me, with the notion of they were considered too sexual, as like, and the demonizing of Chinese women. And so one thing I want to sort of bring into this conversation, building upon everything that's been said, is that the way that we have societally constructed quote unquote victims, like who is a quote unquote good victim or a deserving victim, or who kind of meets the criteria of being a victim in our society. So this idea of here we have an example of a woman who was killed by her husband, but yet we're still questioning, there's still these societal questions of like, did she do something to deserve it? Was it really, he killed her? And so we're still, they're still not giving her that sort of label or that the qualification of victim. And the way that victims have been constructed in our society is extremely racialized. One of the biggest critiques of the domestic violence movement has been how white women have really dominated the construction of victims as really like white women, and this idea of victims as having to be doing something that's quote unquote respectable, that they had to be sort of overpowered, like we create all these criteria. And when we put this in the context of all of our racial stereotypes that invalidate, and you put in your questions like that dehumanize, right? Like we, if we're hypersexualizing a population of women, then everything is sort of filtered through that. When women don't meet that stereotype of being hypersexualized, then they're punished, whether it be through acts of violence or exclusion, or that assumption that they are also, prevents them from getting necessary services or resources or legal respect, So for example, across populations of IPV survivors, there have been studies and questionnaires around, do you want to call the police? How do the police treat you? And across different racial groups, particularly racially minoritized groups, there are descriptions of forms of being invalidated, not listened to. If a survivor does not speak English and they have to get an interpreter, that can slow down the process. They can be easily ignored. The interpreter may not accurately, share what they're saying, and that could actually lead to the survivor being arrested. It's nuanced in terms of which racial stereotypes and which forms of oppression are being activated. And we're just talking about race and gender. If we add in gender identity and sexual identity and class and immigration status, or even the perception of, oh, let me check to see if you're actually undocumented or not. That can be a risk that comes up just by assumption of identity, of what identities mean. And so, we talk about identities as quote unquote social identities, because they're identities that are shaped by our social interactions. So, every aspect of, how is a relationship viewed? How is a quote unquote victim defined? How are police and institutions, domestic violence service providers, legislation, how is everything being created and shaping that sort of social identity? Who is sort of being normed in our definitions of victim and service provision? A lot of times it is not, it's mainly these norms are based off of white women and a particular class of white women. And so it just furthers the sort of systems of privilege. I don't know if that answered your question because I went astray with answering it.
No, like the research you just brought up actually perfect like answer those questions. And I actually I was thinking about, what you said is giving a reminder to social workers, to counselors, that when we face our clients, when we face our, the abuser or the victims, we need to reduce our bias, or we need to be very aware of what kind of complex identities we are dealing with. Like we are all human beings, and our brains are constantly being bombarded with different social media's information, and we do have our own preferences, prejudices, bias, implicit bias. Even though we're professionally trained, we can still have that kind of mindset that we need to be very aware of in our work. So yeah, thank you for that input.
And I appreciate the comment in the chat, Fenty. Yes, your comments around mental health and substance use.
If I can introduce myself, it's like, I'm Fenty Lee. I'm from Connecticut, United States, of course. So I work for Safe Futures. That's domestic violence program in New London, Connecticut, which is like we serves like 21 city towns in southeastern Connecticut. And I also that's just like I'm actually like director for a residential program. So we have 6 different programs, which is from domestic violence shelter. We have transitional program, which is like the survivors and the family can stay for up to 2 years. So we work on the case managing, like budgeting, like finding jobs, going back to school, and then later on like a low income housing, because most of our clients are usually they either they left a stable housing and then become like suddenly like they homeless, right? So if you think about like the clients that come to us, it's like a shelter, and then we work with them either like transitional housing or rapid rehousing, which is like a shorter term of like housing assistance. And then we also have permanent supportive housing, 2 of them, on-site and off-site. I'm sorry, I have to talk like faster because I know our time like limit. And then, but I want to give you a little bit more information what we do. And then also like the permanent supportive housing is like the people can stay there up to like kind of like forever. Like they just pay like 30% of their income. Okay, so regardless, like whatever the income come from can be state assistance, like it's still gonna be 30%. And then also we do have supportive housing for women with substance abuse history. So we have like 8 beds, so the clients can stay up to 6 months. And after that, we also work with them on the other, like remember, the housing is a safe place for them. So we really want to make sure that they go to a safe place, right? And we also take pets. Don't forget, pets is important. Some people, some abusers, like perpetrators, they do things to the pets because it's like, they know like they can, like Professor Fedock earlier says, it's like, how you use like abuse on the, different like psychological, like like mentally, like physical. That's one of them is to the pets. Okay, I'll do this to your pet, so you feel the pain. Okay, that's one of them. So so back to my jobs. Like I also work for family reentry, which is like that's a program for male offenders within domestic violence. So my background is criminal justice. I have master's in criminal justice. Like so that's one of my interests is to work into with the perpetrators to see like their thoughts. It's like what is in there, what made them do what they do. So we really work addressing on behavior, the cognitives and social, norms, like what people think. And then I came from Indonesia, which is like, like 20 something years ago. My sister came to United States from Indonesia, so it's like 40 something years ago. So I myself and my sister, we went through all the systematic and structural, oppressions, like as a woman. And I'm also like Chinese. and then also like, but I was born in Indonesia. I'm the 5th generation. So you see, my thought is like, even though it's just like, I live in the United States for 20 years, but my thoughts is like, it's still like going back to what my parents taught me, like, right? As a woman, like you really have to, like you're already married to your husband. So you're owned by him. I mean, like Doria, you probably be very like familiar, right, Ling? And it's just like you owned by your husband. Okay, I'll share one story. It's just like, I was in the relation, well, I already got married. And then one time it's like, I fought with my husband. Well, it's just like, like we had like arguments. And then I called my dad. I was just like, dad is like, like he did this, he did that. It's just like, we had like, fight of this, like, you know what he said? He said like, Fenty, you already like sold to your husband.
Oh shit.
Okay.
I mean, I'm kind of familiar with that narrative, and I know what you're talking about, Fanny. And thank you for
Exactly.
sharing this personal story. And I know in Asian culture that there's a lasting ingrained idea that women are property, that once you're married, you never belong to your original family. You don't belong to yourself. You belong to your husband. And what interests me is that you called your dad, not your mom. Isn't that interesting that your first reaction like comes up to your mind is you need to call your dad? And which
Yep.
is, feel like has like the owner mindset here. But yeah, actually we are going to our Q&A session. Thank you for leading us there, Fanny. And thank you for introducing your job and your personal story. And thank you for input to our panel discussion.
No problem.
So,
Thank you.
yeah. Is there any other questions, any stories you want to share, anything that you want to, anything in your mind after our panel discussion? You can unmute yourself. You can put your questions in chat box. Anything.
Hi there. I am Mary Jane Foster. Like Penny, I am from Connecticut. Safe Futures and Interval House are the 2 largest domestic violence agencies in the state. Just a couple of remarks on what I have heard today. There is a very large immigrant population that runs from New Haven, Connecticut, all the way up to Springfield, Massachusetts. And it is incredibly diverse and rich and wonderful. But many, many of our immigrants come from patriarchal cultures. And when they come to the United States with their husbands, apart from all the documentation issues and so forth that they face, when we meet with them, there is such a cultural difference between how we view women and women's rights than they do. And to your point, most women from patriarchal cultures are chattel. They are property, and not very valuable property at that. And we see it very, very frequently. So working with those victims is really obviously about meeting them where they are and helping them understand that they have a right to live without violence, a right to live without fear, and that they are not owned by anybody except their own hopes and desires for a future. And it is a tremendous amount of the work that we do. So there is that. The other thing I would like to speak to is the attention that the case illustrated here received. And there is an ongoing and valid criticism about coverage of these cases, that women of color, women with fewer means, when they are victimized, there's less coverage. And that is true, undeniably. Connecticut has a nationally famous case, Jennifer Farber-Dulos, who disappeared, mother of 5. Her husband was charged with murder, committed suicide. His girlfriend has just been convicted. And everyone asks me, why does this case get so much coverage? It's been on Dateline. There are documentaries on Lifetime. And let's call it what it is. Jennifer was raised in privilege. She was white. She was beautifully educated, Brown University. She was talented and smart and funny, breathtakingly pretty, very friendly, had lots of friends, a handsome husband, 5 kids, very, very wealthy. And we don't believe, we as a society, don't believe that it happens to people like that. 2 incredibly talented, highly educated, attractive young Chinese, a wonderful couple who seemingly had the world in front of them. And this is what happened. And what I believe from my experience in many cases is that there is never a first moment in time that results in a strangulation or a death. It is a build up beginning, in my view, with coercive control, limiting the freedom and the ability of a victim to live, I'm going to use her life with freedom and fulfill her dreams and desires. And then it begins to escalate. Financial abuse we are seeing a lot of, and obviously the emotional and verbal, psychological has been just, it, particularly with the pandemic, has been particularly brutal. And of course, we are now facing cyber abuse. Stalking, cyber abuse, strangulation are all up. And so this is, as the CDC says, a public health crisis. We need to come together and treat it as the pandemic. It is the shadow pandemic, as it was called, and shine a light on this. This is why this panel is so important from my perspective, is because we are shining a light on a culture that doesn't talk about intimate partner abuse. And it is being triggered by a high profile murder. But let's keep this door open. Let's keep these conversations going. As I often say, bad things happen in the dark, but there is hope when you shine a light. So let's keep that going. And thank you all for pulling this together.
Thank you. Thank you. I truly appreciate that. And I truly resonate with what you said, that it is an unspeakable problem in our society, especially in Asian communities. And when I work with different nonprofits, some of them are working for Asian communities, some of them are mainly white centered. I do feel what you were talking, that, we're on different chapters on this domestic violence prevention issues. For Chinese or Asian community, we are more on the chapter that we need to tell people this is a problem. This is an issue that we need to pay attention to. And maybe for Western countries, we are more advanced on this topic. People realize it's an issue. It is a problem. It is not just something happened inside your family. It is something that we can tackle down as a society. And, as social workers, clinicians, we definitely need to realize that the cultural background is playing a role here. And speaking of the patriarchal norms, well, I do like the whole world is a patriarchal world, but it's just, with different degrees, different levels. But yeah, thank you for that. So I got a question from chat box. What do you think needs to done to have more media to do more coverage on these incidents? Did I get that right? What do you think we need to be done to have more media to to have more coverage on these incidents? Any thoughts on that? Gina, Yijing, Li Ying?
I'm sorry, Gina, if you, yeah. I think I really like the question, but also Mary Jane Foster, I really like your input about like how we as a community or society need to tackle this issue as almost like public crisis, as a pandemic. And that's, I think, I assume the motivation of this question, like how we can bring more attention to this kind of cases. Like, I think that's the importance of like, yes, like we need more attention, we need more effort in it, but like also like what kind of focus we wanted to give this kind of case. So I think I really like the point of like, yes, like we wanted to hear more story like that, but we wanted to hear more story beyond just a death, beyond this high profile cases, beyond just a specific case of a story. So I think, yes, we need to more think about how this kind of case highlighted connecting to the community conversation. Then I think this is going in a like full positive cycle that we are going to focus on more of case of these kind of stories. So I think the things that we need to do, like the panel we just have today, I think we need to bring this attention to specific case into community. And then we're going to have a form the conversation and actual ongoing effort. And I think it will bring the positive cycle or bring more highlight, bring more attention to the other cases beyond this high profile cases. So I think it's important to have this community effort, community education, and also the one of the things that we wanted to highlight what Fenty Lee is working on, what Mary Jane Foster working on, this community resource. We wanted to focus on what is in our community, who's working on these issues, like what kind of resource they need. I think that can be some things we can create a positive cycle of the attention and also focus.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely going to be a cooperative effort.
Yeah,
Professor.
I also want, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I also really appreciate our discussion about how to bring this issue back to community, because I really feel that because back to the news, a lot of attention is paid to how the criminal legal system respond to this incident. But I feel like especially for immigrants and especially for undocumented immigrants, like the criminal legal system might not be a help, like something that's be helpful, or because it can actually do more harm. Because from intersectional perspective, gender-based violence might not be the worst thing happening in the survivor's life. The system can be another threat to their life. So if we can bring this issue back to community to explore some other interventions that does not be more powerful and more helpful, more yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah, because your internet is kind of lagging, but we get the main idea here. Thank you. And I got a question in the chat box saying that when the one being abused is ready to leave or move out, is it legal to take her minor kids less than 18 years old with her without the other parent's consent? And MJ answered that for me. Yes.
It happens all the time. You are fleeing an imminent danger of harm. And so taking your children and going to a safe house or another safe location is absolutely legal. And then of course, what follows is the legal process. But yes, you absolutely, we have women and their children in our safe house all the time. It's absolutely legal. I want to say a little bit about reaching out, because Interval House, and I'm sure Safe Futures too, but we have done small, medium, and large initiatives on reaching out. I speak all of the time at the Chamber of Commerce, at the Rotaries, in houses of faith. And we actively seek out those speaking engagements so we can talk about what domestic violence is and the resources that are available. We have developed with a number of organizations that serve literally in total thousands of Hartford, Connecticut region kids to go into their programming and talk about healthy relationships, because this abusive behavior starts young. And we have got to get, if you will, to the top of the river to stop it. We have just formed partnerships where we are going into the schools as well. And so we speak wherever we can. I'm speaking to a group of HR managers who work in various state departments in Connecticut. In September, we talked to directors of HR, because when domestic violence is in the workplace and it comes from the home into the workplace, HR needs to understand how to take care of their employees. They have a duty of care to their employees. So we are doing all of that. We write op-eds. We have a men's advisory group for whom we help write op-eds, just to get some awareness out there of what we are doing. And then we have doubled down on social media and created podcasts and many webinars that we put out there at lunchtime. And it's like a 30-40-minute webinar. And sometimes we only have 6 or 8 people. Sometimes we have 15, but it's out there and you never know what the ripple effect is. So we are just throwing, as the expression goes, all the jello we have on the wall to see what sticks, to shine a light on this issue and raise awareness of it.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the work. I think I got a more question here saying, could you speak a little about how different political climates for opportunities, radical reform shaped the ways GV cases are handled from your experience working in the US and your home countries? This question is specifically for Li Ying and Yijing.
I think so. To give you a little bit of background, that I have worked in mainly sexual violence center, but we did serve as domestic violence survivors in Korea. I did working in the center, and then after coming in the United States, I mainly work with the college students. So there is a little bit of difference in community that I serve between these two cultures. But overall, the understanding of gender-based violence, I would say in Korea, that has been more conservative in terms of the survivor deservedness, for sure. Like who can be defined as survivor, that has been limited of definition of, for example, the physical violence or a little bit of psychological abuse is categorized as a domestic violence, but nothing's really more about sexual violence or even economic abuse has been not discussed a lot. But in here in the United States, I think there's a more active movement in terms of like to recognize that there is a form of violence and how can it interplay in the relationship, not only just physical violence or not only just like psychological violence. So I think that has the main conversation I noticed after coming in here. But also another big difference is the hurdle or the barriers to having accessing the service in general. I think even though in Korea, I did serve this community, I did have a resource as a clinician, a lot of times the biggest difficulty we had as a resource is to having people. So this accessibility or the barrier that people think that, okay, like they're going to understand me or I'm going to get the treatment, all this understanding about this kind of services or the stigma when getting help has a little difficult in Korea versus here. But I think this playing the same thing, even though the United States as in general for the majority population has different in Korea. I think when we focus on Asian populations, specifically in the United States, the cultural barrier is still there. So I don't think that that's not happening in here. I cannot say that that's just the only issue that I face in Korea. So I think that has been the common thing I notice in here and also versus in Korea.
I hope that answered your question, Yijia. Anything else you want to add? Anything you want to add on? Ying?
Yeah, I can share a little bit about the efforts in China to address this issue. I think the major focus currently is still on building up the legal response to domestic violence and also child abuse. Because actually, a few years ago, the first law just passed to criminalize or maybe just have a law to regulate behaviors of domestic violence and child abuse. And so the current focus is to implement this law and put it into ground and make sure that the police officers and other related department actually knows about this law and carry out this law. So I feel like there is very limited room for more radical actions towards this issue, but I do feel that only talks about criminal legal reforms or implementation is not enough.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you, Professor Fedock and Fancy, for answering those questions for me. Yeah, we're running out of time. I think we're gonna go one more. And also for the people who need assistance, especially legal aid, please go to our website. We do offer free or the chargeable we sometimes some program we offer we do charge, and they offer legal aid if you need that. Do you think there's dilemma that people maybe put more attention on career development but not these cases? I'm not sure what you mean. You mean that people may pay more attention on their own career development, so they tend to ignore the abusive atmosphere in their household? If you don't mind, you can elaborate on that, or anyone get a sense what she's asking. You can just unmute and answer the question. Oh yeah, thank you. Thank you for offering all those links and the answers. Yeah, I think we finished every question. And yeah, I want to thank you all for joining us, especially Dr. Fedock, Ajing, Li Ying. Your research and your work contributes significantly to Asian women community, and we create a safe and inspiring world for all women to grow, to explore, and to make a difference in their own ways. I want to give DPI volunteers working in the vaccine who made this panel discussion possible. And I also want to thank you for everyone who joined today. And it's the support and attention from you all made us work easier and more meaningful. I want to give you all a preview of our upcoming event. So our next session of domestic violence panel discussion will be on March 22nd. And our panelist is going to be Coral Wu. Coral is a clinical social worker working for Ken Wayne. Ken Wayne is an organization who advocates for anti-violence. And yeah, I want to see you all on March 22nd also. And thank you again for everyone's attention and time.
Thank you so much for organizing this. I really appreciate, again, the care and attention to this topic. So thank you, and for all the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the weather.
Take care.
Thank you.
Oh, if anyone want to leave their email here, we would like to send follow-up emails. And, you know, the email is going to come with our upcoming events, the legal support we offer, the counseling program we offer. I will stay here longer just in case anyone got any further questions. Thank you, everyone. Angie, I'm sorry that we didn't answer your question because I'm not sure what you mean by that question. If you want, or you're still here, can you elaborate on that one? We can definitely get back to you answers. All right. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy your weekend and hope we can see you all soon next week. Thank you.
Hello，大家怎么在？